Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, this front corner of the room. We know that folks are still going to grab lunch, but we are on a very tight schedule. We've got 6,300 seconds with you all for this portion of the day. And so we're going to move through and maximize every second. So as you saw in the description, we've got an amazing group of folks. Greg Jobin-Leeds, who is the author of the When We Fight, We Win book that everyone received, is going to be speaking with us. And we've got some amazing panelists that are going to highlight the work that they've done over the last few years. We've got Vinny Cervantes is with the Denver Justice Project, Jamisa Davis with Roots Community Health, Francisco Garcia as Enough, and DJ Etef is kicking us off. So with that, we're going to have some spoken word. And he's got, for those of you all at the back, it'll be on the video, but Etef's probably going to talk about this. He's got fruit plugged in that helps him with his spoken word. So it's powerful stuff. So make sure to check it out. DJ Etef.
Your tag's dragging.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. So it's a great opportunity to speak to you all right now. It's a lot of great important things to speak on. Of course, environmental justice, sustainability, holistic health, permaculture, carbon sequestration, regenerative agriculture, all those things are important. So what I do, I figure out a way to interact with young people and also intergenerationally around sustainability through hip hop. So I'll be able to show you a little bit what this looks like real quick, but pretty much I like to walk into a spot like this. Turn that up on the sound. A little bit louder, please. Yeah. So what this is called PlantBased Records. I have a new record label. All of the food is organically grown. And the beats are fresh. Sometimes they're golden, sometimes they're red. And we go into schools and we teach math literacy. And we also teach science. We teach agronomy. We teach a lot of these different styles of using hip-hop to actually address the issues in the urban cities, and I'm interested in going into rural as well. So the conversation is important. You know, you can use food as medicine, but also as a tool for education, you know, because as we all know, food is medicine, you know? It's real important, and this conversation can continue. So I'm working on a brand new project that I would love to talk to everyone after, but so you can see some of the work that we're doing, I would like to just kind of start off with just this video. It's called Cool to Live, and it's basically a music video that shows you the impact of the prison industrial complex, the impact of gang-related activity and, you know, the drug epidemic in the communities of color, as well as fracking and things like air pollution and agronomy and urban agriculture. So this song is called Cool to Live, and it actually is the newest wave of environmental hip-hop, eco-hip-hop, and we're taking this around the world right now with my mentee, Shuteska Martinez. Check out this new book, We Rise. Shout out to my man Greg for being here. You know what it is. Respect. Run the film.
Cool.
fresh. Used to let her drink, it ain't the same now. Natural gas up in the water, make your faucet flame out. You want some change now? You want some change now? Hotter than a sun's core, drilling for the oil, fracking at the earth's core. Good thing we all stood up to that keystone mess. Grow a garden for stress with echinacea. And Russian sage for open lava on that raw food diet. Have you checked the price of cancer? Maybe you should try it. I'm from the old school, that's what them elders say. Mentally free, but still eat like slavery. Digitally, I'm trying to see 2020 and beyond.
Shell, the tide ebbs and swells. We can't feel it from a cell. They opened up a jail, closed down the school. But keep your cool, son. Not letting the heat wave make you sweat is rule one. Jewels won't turn to sustenance and food when the warming of the globe is done.
It's cool, and it's cool, and it's cool, and it's cool, and it's cool, so cool, and it's cool to live, and it's cool, so cool, and it's cool. It's cool to live.
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the projects we set up. That's my brother. Right on. Thank you so much. On the hook, that's my brother Cody Chestnut from The Roots. I've been working personally with a lot of artists around the nation, and my goal is to create a visual and a song for every, movement, for every conversation that needs to happen. And so, right now we're starting with food justice, because food justice matters. More people die from heart disease and police brutality, but nobody want to talk about it in the hood, so we're going to put it on wax and then drop it with the beats, literally. Peace, y'all. One love.
One more time, give it up to Dr. Etef. So I'm just going to my name is Barclay Jones. I'm fortunate to be the moderator for this great, amazing group of talented, dynamic people. I'm just going to give a couple introductory comments, and then Greg's going to come up and share some work of the book. And then we're going to go through and have each of our individual folks highlight a specific campaign that they've been working on that relates to the work of Opportunity Youth. So that we know that multiple stakeholders have been involved in Opportunity Youth work since the beginning of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And it's wonderful to see all of the successes that we've heard about the last couple of days. We know that as we do this work, we have to, and Karen was so wonderful in reminding us yesterday morning about how we have to remind ourselves of the little victories. And Juan mentioned it this morning. He talked about micro supports, but the way I've heard down at University of Colorado Denver, Dr. Brenda Allen specifically calls the opposite of microaggressions, microaffirmations. So when we give that little pat on the back, that little additional word of kindness and support to somebody, that helps us work through a lot of the challenges that we're facing on the ground and in our communities and around the country and around the world. We know that a lot of us, and I'm sure this has come up in some smaller sessions, and we hope we can talk through this with some of our panelists, is a lot of us are feeling the frustration and the anger and the sadness. In our group earlier this morning, we talked about righteous indignation, right? When someone says that you're angry, if you're righteously indignant, that is not the same as anger. And we need to clarify people when they use the word to try to minimize what our feelings and emotions are. We have to be really intentional about what our contemporary movements are, how they tie with the historical work that we're all very aware of, and then where do we want to take that work moving forward. So we know that a lot of you are still eating some lunch, but if you could just take a moment, I'm going to throw out 3 or 4 quick questions, but because this session is very heavily around engagement and activism and community organizing, we want you all to just take a few minutes to either write at your seat or reflect for yourself on a few different issues that we can think about. One is, what do you want to know about organizing? What are your learning goals? Another is, what specific steps have you taken to organize local stakeholders? If you have been organizing, what opportunities and or challenges were born out of the experience of your organizing efforts? And then the last one is, if you have not been organizing, what have been some obstacles that you've encountered in your work that you may be able to address through organizing? So take a few minutes for that, and then I'm going to come back up and introduce Greg, and he's going to get us rolling. Okay, you all, we know we could let you all talk for the next 6,000 seconds, but we're not going to let you do that. So I just want to be able to introduce, I'm not going to go into detail with Greg Jobin-Leeds' bio. I do want to highlight that you will see, if you have a chance to look at the book, one of the things that I've loved about getting the chance to get to know and work with Greg over the past few years is his real intentionality that as we've heard about, that we're centering youth or other marginalized populations that we're not, the nonprofit sector is so good at doing things on behalf of other folks as opposed to with other folks. And Greg is wonderful about centering that in his work. He obviously has highlighted a number of these stories through the work of When We Fight, We Win. And so we're going to hear from Greg for a few minutes, and then we're going to hear from panelists. Please help me welcome Greg Jobin-Leeds.
Before I get started, I just wanted to see what were some of the key questions that were out there that people had. Anybody want to share 1 or 2 questions that you want to make sure we get to today in our panel or in my remarks? Anybody? No questions? Okay, thank you.
Community organizing. Oh, there we go. I really appreciated the bridge in talking about community organizing from our Boston convening, in which we heard from Marshall Gans, and we know he's like a guru of community organizing. And in this conversation, I'm sure is going to be rich and be a part two of that. I'm just thankful for the intentionality of it.
Thank you. One more? There.
Hello, Christina Cross of Thrive Chicago, and my question is, how do you balance the urgency with the process of community organizing and the fact that that usually takes some time to build awareness and build momentum?
Thank you. One more? Okay. Sure, we will get to some of these. I did interview Marshall, and I know him from our work in Boston with the student immigrant movement there. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I guess I control it now. There we go. This piece of art is done by Kevin Rashid Johnson. Can you all hear me all right? Kevin Rashid Johnson has been in solitary confinement for 17 years. 23 hours a day, not seeing another soul. Out of all the interviews we did in When We Fight, We Win, the interview we did with Kevin Rashid Johnson was the only one we could not do in person or on the phone. He had to write us his answers in pencil. They still won't allow him to have color often in solitary. His art becomes the symbol of the California prisoners' hunger strike. 30,000 California prisoners go out on hunger strike. Why? Many of them in solitary confinement. Why would you do it? They do it to protest the inhumane conditions. And while the prisoners on the inside organize the strike, many of them from solitary confinement, which is mind-boggling, on the outside, artists and activists work to spread the hunger strikers' message. And they expose the widespread use of solitary confinement. And a year afterwards, actually 2 years afterwards, the prisoners won a major policy victory in California. The head of the prison system went into the prisons, and there was a widespread change in the use of solitary confinement. And then a few months later, New York passed even stronger legislation. And then as opposition built, President Obama signed an executive order outlawing the use of solitary confinement for juveniles. If Kevin, thank you. If Kevin Rashid Johnson can become extraordinary, if he can, while he's in jail, if he can study the root causes of of the whole prison system and of our society, we can become extraordinary from our relative privilege. I'm going to share with you today about how everybody in When We Fight, We Win were ordinary people who became extraordinary because they stepped up and they were fierce. And they allowed the moment to transform them. When We Fight, We Win is filled with the words of movement art activists and the art of prophetic artists. And they're all making progress, like the California prisoners. Since the elections, book sales have shot up, and Donald Trump's been very good to us. And we're being asked to be in more and more of these kinds of conversations around the country. Last night I had the pleasure, and we went for the afternoon for a hike with ETEF and with Francisco. And Francisco told us how there's two communities that he's part of where there's a level of trust, respect, and solidarity and love. And he talked about the two communities being the National Council of Youth Leaders, woo-woo, and the other is When We Fight, We Win community. And so I just was really touched, and it helped me connect even more to this audience here when he was able to make that connection. I'm so glad to be here with you all over these last few days because of the multi-generational connections here. The work of transformative change has always cut across generations, and it's always been driven by the youth. Future generations will stand on our shoulders, and we stand on the shoulders of past ones. But youth, from Soweto in South Africa to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, to the lunch counter sit-ins, all across the, there you go, to the freedom rides and lunch counter sit-ins. They were also pivotal in the civil rights movement. Youth have led social movements because of their passion, their ideals, and their willingness and ability to take risks. And there's a powerful moral clarity that youth have. So from the movement from Black Lives, youth have led to the LGBTQ movement, to Occupy, to the immigrant rights movement. Young people here today, do not underestimate your value. Do not underestimate your role. To those of us working with youth, don't underestimate the youth's role. We must centralize them, and I've been so impressed with how this gathering is doing that. As I've gotten to know most of you, many of you through this conference, I've also been impressed by what I've read about the term that the Opportunity Youth Incentive Fund uses of radical possibilities for youth voice, engagement, and leadership. Radical possibilities. It's quite a beautiful phrase. And radical means either coming from the root or root cause, or going to the root, as in those who are most impacted. I know this is a time of fear and frustration for many of us in this room, and certainly for the young people here. The issues surrounding Puerto Rico right now are particularly heavy in my heart. My co-authors are there, and I have family there. And for 20 years, I've worked with my co-authors, and they're based in Santurce, Puerto Rico, part of San Juan. And they're ones who designed the beauty and the feel and the look of this book. And they're right now organizing meals. They're serving hundreds of meals a day. They're creating these beautiful communities. They've been a hub of organizing for years. And throughout the island, they're able to start getting help out and building these local mutual communities. But it's now been 3 weeks after the storm, and millions of our brothers and sisters still have no water, no electricity, and disease is starting to spread rampantly. Hospitals don't have supplies. Powers are going out. 95% of the island still has no power, and over half the island has no water. So fearful and fighting off hopelessness, they're pushing through, and they're building back their gardens and building back their houses, and they see opportunities in love as they're collaborating. And I love this. This is a piece of art that was done in collaboration by an artist in California. And so it says, release the aid, cancel the debt. What else say? Repeal the Jones Act. And what's the other part in red? Thank you. I can't see it from here. Decolonize Puerto Rico. Oh, I can't see it here. I got a screen. So for decades, we have seen the escalating rise of storms right now in California. Of threats of an ecocide. We've seen the taking away of voting rights, the defunding of public schools. And indeed, so many of our public spaces we are losing at a very rapid pace. 35 years ago, when I started teaching, I was a high school teacher, and the U.S. was the world leader in high school graduation rates. Not so anymore. Today, we're the world leader in prisons. It's gone up 800%, the number of prisons. For decades, we faced mass incarceration, extreme inequality, nuclear war, the threats of nuclear war, and the threats of ecocide. And they are spiraling downhill. And so that's one of the reasons that calls on each of us to become extraordinary. It's a piece by Antonia Dardere, amazing author, but who wrote A Dissident Voice, which is incredible, especially for anybody working with youth. But she also writes the afterword to the book and edited the book. But it's a piece about symbolizing the disposability of so many of us. So I'm going to share with you some stories from When We Fight, We Win, and how and I'm going to invite everyone in this room to step up and become an extraordinary agent of change. We must and we can, and as I said, and so many people in this room and others are showing, it's easier to become extraordinary today because the stakes are so high and because so many people want to act. My parents taught me a bit about living in times of escalating threats, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about why I do this work and why I wrote When We Fight, We Win. My father was the last Jew in his high school in Hamburg, Germany. It was 1938. He was 15 when he helped the rabbi clean up the temples after Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht, the night of the crystals, where broken glass was throughout the streets, where Jewish stores and homes and temples were smashed. When Nazi youth and citizens joined and smashed the windows. 75 years later, if talk about Germany comes up, I can see the fear resurface in my father's eyes. The first time I heard about the ICE vans, the immigration, customs, and enforcement vans pulling up in the dead of night, sweeping up many of our students and many of our families, rounding them up for deportation, it sent chills throughout my body. It reminded me of the rounding up of Jews in my father's dwindling world. Immigration raids are on the rise once again today. 2 years ago, the New York Times reported that the Obama administration was targeting mothers and children to send a message. Women and children are incarcerated in detention camps and represent the fastest growing segment of the prison industrial complex. My dad told me about the boycotts of Jewish businesses that occurred before the mass concentration camps that he narrowly escaped. Stormtroopers were posted outside our stores with signs that read, "Die Juden sind unser Unglück." The Jews are our misfortune. As that became the national narrative and the definition of the problem, more and more people accepted the fascist solution. My father's stories echo the language that has been dominating our national dialogue for decades. The stories and speeches read like the our misfortune signs with women or super predators, Mexicans, Muslims, blacks, others interchanged for Jews. We see videos on a much too regular basis of police officers shooting an unarmed black man, police throwing a young girl to the ground and kneeling into her back, immigrant children in detention camps, a black child arrested for her drawing on a desk. Stop and frisk, militarized police forces, and metal detectors in our schools. My mom also was a refugee 2 times before the age of 11, and she would often wave her finger at me and my siblings, and she would say, "Don't think it can't happen here." If I ever doubted the terrifying wisdom of her words, I no longer can. So what do we do? As I was researching When We Fight, We Win, and I've been going on the book tour, it's given me a core set of answers about how to become extraordinary and how to create transformative social movements. What is transformation? The folks in When We Fight, We Win, they're organizing around radical possibilities. They're organizing for far-reaching change on 4 levels. 1, personal transformation. 2, organizational or a community transformation. 3, political or structural transformation. And 4, cultural transformation. The growing resistance to Trump policies, the Women's March, the immigrant and climate marches, the movement for Black Lives, the Mother's Day bailout fund, and the student strikes, these and many other fierce efforts described in When We Fight, We Win and since are all reasons for optimism. The folks in the book are the tip of the iceberg, because as I go out and as I meet more and more folks, who you'll meet some of them today, I just see what this massive movement is that we are part of. And before coming here, I didn't know about this movement that you have here. All right, so I'm going to share with you some of the lessons from the book. And the first one is from the education chapter, and it's from on the south side of Chicago. Jittu Brown is a leader at the Kensington Oakland Community Organization, or COCO. COCO works multi-generationally with youth, parents, and grandparents. And like every one of the stories in the book, they demonstrate how leadership comes from those most impacted. Jittu Brown says, a missing ingredient that nobody talks about in all this is love. I know that when you are working with someone or a group of people that you love, you're going to work harder. You're going to pour in every resource because you care about them. You recognize that your future is linked to theirs. Movements start from within the most affected communities and take the time to build on local leadership. The antidote to the corporatization of our society is this type of organizing, grounded in community. On the south side of Chicago, where the education wars have raged the hottest, the future that we are working for is one that's rooted in self-determination, says Jittu Brown. I think that communities have the right to control the institutions that are in their neighborhoods. Fundamentally, there's a line being drawn between the neighborhood agenda, or the agenda that comes from the roots, and the corporate agenda. G2 uses the word self-determination. Many of us use the word decolonization. Barclay sent me about a year ago an article by Paul Kibble, and it's a useful guide to achieving decolonization in our daily work and in the work we do here. So I invite you all to think and ask within your organization some of these questions that I found really helpful as I think about doing my work. In what ways has our staff and board become separated from the people we serve because of demands of funders? Because of the status and pay of our staff? Because of the professionalization of our work? Because of the interdependence of our work with businesses, foundations, or other nonprofit organizations? Are we sharing power and access to power with those on the front lines of the struggle? Are there ways we train young people to just go along? Or do we train them to be in a contentious relationship to power? I believe to become extraordinary today, we must ask ourselves these questions. So I'm going to talk about another lesson about the... Am I out of order? No, I'm not. Okay. The next lesson I'm going to is about the role of community and how one can find a win even when we have a loss. A few years back, Song, Southerners on New Ground, worked in North Carolina to stop an anti-queer defense of marriage bill. They lost. But here's what is extraordinary. They held 1 million conversations across the state to tell their story, not just about being queer, but also about the horrors of the deportation camps, mothers taken away from nursing babies, and how the dreams of youth have been taken away as they are seen as criminals. They tell their stories and build powerful collaborations that not only make a stronger organization, but build a statewide movement. That's a loss, but winning. We need to be getting directly involved locally to be consolidating our power in ways that force us to recruit newcomers one by one, ways that help grow the leadership and the power, particularly. How many minutes we have? Ooh. Okay. Mary Hooks from Southerners on New Ground spoke at a conference in Atlanta shortly after the elections. She said, we must stand up and be fierce and allow the moment and the work to transform ourselves. Maybe during the conversation later, I'll tell you about how DACA was won through nonviolent civil disobedience in Obama's re-election campaign office. So I want to talk to you for a second about visions. The abolitionist vision of the movement for Black lives. Imagine a world that goes beyond prisons and abolishing all the root causes of why someone would go to jail. abolishing racial profiling, stop and frisk, lack of access to schools, drug treatment and jobs, and all the other reasons why somebody ends up in jail. It goes to the root causes of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. The visions from the Women's March in Washington is equally gorgeous and interconnected. To do our work, we have to be able to imagine a world that does not yet exist. My co-authors have developed street sign. So here's just a great picture of a world that doesn't exist. An artist transforming it. All right, I'm a little behind, so I'm going to jump ahead. Okay. We become extraordinary each day as we step up to fight. We become extraordinary as we challenge the cultures and institutions of power that disenfranchise and marginalize our people. The youth in this room, and the activists of color, and those of you who see yourself on the front lines, know that you will need to lead. Be loving but clear with your allies, who will need to stand in solidarity in this room. To the adults in this room, to the funders, and those who do not see yourselves on the front lines, we need to lovingly support those on the front lines. We need to step out of our comfort zone and do a lot of listening. To close, these are some of the core principles of organizing that the folks in When We Fight, We Win have taught us. Number one, transformative organizers decolonize. They're centralized and grounded in the most impacted communities. Number two, they recognize youth have played a key role throughout history. Number three, they create transformative visions with radical possibilities. Number four, they go to the root cause of problems. They study clearly about patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism. They reclaim the intersection of our struggles and identities. They look for vulnerabilities in power to focus their nonviolent civil disobedience, and they transform power. They disrupt it, they change who has it, and I'm not talking about political parties, and they change the nature of power once it's reclaimed. We must be fierce as individuals and as organizations and willing to be transformed in the process so we don't end up having to flee like my parents and grandparents. We have an opportunity unlike any in our lifetime. So in summary, I want to close with the gift from the activists that I interviewed and pass these lessons on to you. They invite us to be fierce, be grounded, bringing those on the front lines and most impacted in, be transformative, challenge the status quo power at the core root structures, and lastly, use words, use art, use song, use your most creative self. Double down and join transformative movements at this critical juncture. Become extraordinary. When we fight, we win. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. One more round of applause for Greg on that. So now we're fortunate that we know that the stories that the book highlight or the stories that are highlighted in the book by Greg and the team are living, breathing, crying, loving efforts. And we're fortunate to have some amazing folks three folks that are come up and share about some specific highlights, chapters in the book, but talk about their work on the ground at the present moment. So these are not static stories. They're going on right now. The first person that's going to come up and share for a few minutes is Vinny, and Vinny's work is with the Denver Justice Project around breaking down the school-to-prison pipeline. Vinny, police accountability.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. As he mentioned, my name is Vinny with the Denver Justice Project. And we focus on three things as an organization for the most part, which is ending mass incarceration, transforming the nature of law enforcement, and seeking racial justice. And part of what we do looks a lot like seeking police accountability. And so we do that in three different ways in Denver. One way is by bringing attention to the role of the district attorney. Not many people know this in Denver, but the Denver DA is the highest paid elected official in the state of Colorado. They're paid more than the governor, they're paid more than the mayor of Colorado or Denver. They're the highest paid elected official. And we maintain as an organization that they are the single most influential member of the criminal justice system, contributing to mass incarceration and a lack of police accountability. Our first event as an organization was actually DA Forum, and so connecting this to When We Fight, We Win, we assigned a homework assignment for all candidates that were taking part in that forum. And we had them read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which is mentioned in the book. Some of them read it and some of them didn't. But one of the candidates that read it, who eventually won, we had a meeting with her. Her name is Beth McCann, who won the Denver DA race last year. But we met with her as soon as she was elected, and she let us know that she has mandated her entire office to now read that book. So, yes, that's a really good... We need that narrative in that office because that, again, is the office that contributes most to these issues in an elected capacity. The other way that we achieve police accountability is by ensuring independent oversight. So independent oversight is an independent body of civilian-driven accountability for law enforcement and for the DA. And in Denver, that existed as the Office of the Independent Monitor. And it's the only form of independent oversight that we have in our city, and it was under threat of being dissolved because of the mayor. And so we lobbied city council and we persuaded them to propose and eventually pass that they would put this issue on the ballot last year in 2016. And so it was voted on by Denver residents and it won. So we achieved a ballot success as well. But during that process, we were also very clear in saying that the office itself didn't have a lot of teeth. So we are currently working to improve that office. The third thing that we do to try to seek police accountability is to influence the discipline matrix. The discipline matrix is the interdepartmental discipline process. That's to say that if you do something that's against policy as an officer, for example, kill somebody, then you may be either fired, suspended, put on desk duty, so to say, or nothing happens. And what typically happens is that nothing happens, or if something does happen to that officer or their job, they have an endless amount of appeals. And so our work has been to influence why they have those appeals, which is highly due to the power of police unions. And so those are the three things that we do essentially as an organization to seek accountability, but we also, what we do looks a lot like reform. And unfortunately, it is reform. But what we have as a vision for an organization is transformation, because my colleague Alex Landau, and I hope that you look at his story as well through StoryCorps, he was nearly beat to death because he asked for a warrant when he was being searched. And the officer in that case called him the N-word after they almost beat him to death. And so there's no policy decision to change that. And also, as far as reform, one of the big movements that's happening right now is independent prosecutors. So bringing a prosecutor from outside of the district to rule whether or not they should charge an officer. Unfortunately, Denver has a role in Tamir Rice because our chief deputy DA went to Cleveland, Ohio to say that we should not charge officers for Tamir Rice's death. And unfortunately, Cleveland, Ohio can't hold that Denver DA's office accountable. So reform has a lot of issues as well. And one of the things that we look for transformation is the idea of public safety and how our public safety has been defined by our budget through funding police departments and jails. And we would rather define public safety by addressing public health issues such as poverty, mental health, homelessness, and drug addiction. And when you treat it that way, you pursue change through treatment rather than punishment. But I want to mention Charlottesville for a second because that was an issue of white supremacy that showed a very ugly face. And we as an organization believe that it's important to face white supremacy when it appears in the streets with torches and with hoods. But we also think that it's equally important to show up to face white supremacy when it shows up in an office in a suit with a budget. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinny. Next, we want to hear from Jamisha, and Jamisha is going to share how she incorporates art into her work, life, and day-to-day practice as a fierce, dynamic Black woman. Please welcome Jamisha.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. This is my 4th time here in Aspen, so I'm always, looking forward to seeing like what's new, So I'm gonna start out with a brief spoken word piece, and so we'll go there. And I'll talk a little bit about it, where it came from, and what my inspiration was. And so some of you may have heard it yesterday, but I'm gonna go forward. Okay. So, couldn't he hear me, hear my cries of pain? Couldn't he understand my tears of shame? With the no that left me the expression I truly meant, yet he interpreted it backwards, thinking it was a yes I sent. Left me there afterwards, cold and alone, feeling soiled, used. He never heard my agonizing moan. Cut me bad, hurt me deep, let me be, bring forever sleep. Not once, not twice, too many to count, too scared, too ashamed, every man I now doubt. Though brief the time, it felt like an eternity, and knowing this ironic guilt shall always stay with me. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. And so that's a piece that I created, just really wanting to uplift the voices of the young women that I work with. And so for about 2 years, I was working with Missy, which is a nonprofit located in Oakland, where I'm at. And so it's motivating, inspiring, supporting, and serving sexually exploited youth. And so, I'm not sure if folks know, but sexual exploitation is a huge issue, and I'm sure in most of your cities and your communities, whether you're aware or not. And so I just wanted to really uplift their voices through that piece. And then just to Barclay's point, really, it's funny that I'm being referred to as an artist. I never really see myself as that. I'm not someone who goes out and, does a lot of performances around spoken word, but it's something that I'm passionate about and that I do sort of for myself as a form of self-care. And so I just kind of wanted to uplift the idea that, we all, right, have the ability to do art within ourselves, and that it can be used for something like self-care. I mentioned that I've been a part of OII for about 4 years now, and when I started, I had just came out of the opportunity youth sort of realm, right? I had went through a nonprofit organization that gave me the opportunity to work in Alameda County probation. I stayed there as an intern for about 6 months and then was hired on as a full-time employee and stayed for almost 3 years. From there, I entered into Missy as a juvenile justice case manager, then went to a program coordinator for their mentor and volunteer program, and I recently just transitioned from Missy into Roots Community Health, where I'm launching a program for young women called Teen Success. And the program, thank you. Thanks. Appreciate that. And so the program is aimed towards providing some sort of parenting education as well as case management for teen mothers, right? And so right now in Alameda County, our infant mortality rate amongst Black women specifically is at 12%, which is one of the highest in the entire country. And I don't know if many people know, but that is an indication of how a community is doing as a whole. And so with this sort of concept and idea of self-care, I've really been thinking about it a lot. And just thinking about my journey as a young professional, from Alameda County probation to now, I've been in spaces where, work is hard, right? Working with some of the most vulnerable youth is very difficult. And the idea of self-care has always been something that I've grappled with, right? Oftentimes I hear self-care as like, yoga or, coming to the mountains, right? And sitting in peace. And for me as a young woman coming from a, impoverished, low-income community, the idea of going to yoga or sitting in the mountains never really felt right to me. And it's not something I even enjoy that much, right? So always thinking, and then like, how much does it cost to do self-care? Like, what does that look like? And I've been fortunate enough to be a part of a team that has really been intentional about thinking about what that is and what does it look like. And a team that is full of women of color, right? And I've been able to really come to a place of understanding that the fact that I'm here today, right now, standing, has been a part of my self-care, whether or not I was able to go to do yoga or not. And oftentimes some of my team were like, well, I typically go out to have drinks with my friends, I try to have a lot of noise, and we sit and feel guilty like that's not self-care, I'm not practicing it. And these are conversations that we have over and over and over again. And so for any young person who's thinking about, when you hear all of these folks talking about self-care, how do I practice self-care? I'm not doing it right, I'm not doing enough. And I just want to uplift the idea that because you're here today, because you're able to show up, right, you're practicing self-care. and thinking about those times, thank you. Yeah, I think let's give them, yes, let's do it, right? Yep, and I think, those times that we do go out with our friends and, and create noise, that can be a form of self-care. And I just want to share this quote that I really, really love, it's dear to my heart, from Audre Lorde, and it's, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and this is an act of political warfare. Yeah, thanks. Yep. And I'll just add, self-care is a radical act, right? Especially for Black women in particular. And so I'll leave with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamisha. Jamisha and I didn't even talk, but at the end of the wrap-up, I was gonna use that Audre Lorde quote. So thank you so much for sharing it. It's always better when a Black woman does it than a multiracial brother. It's always better. Right? Always. Next, we're going to hear from Francisco, who many of you all obviously in this network know. He's been a superstar for a number of years with the initiative, and his work often highlights the work and the struggle of families and DACA students. Francisco.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys put up the slides? Okay. I'll try to be brief. How's everybody doing today? I'm a little confused, disoriented. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I was born and raised in California, Los Angeles. I've always been passionate about art. I've been around it in hip hop as well. Growing up in LA, I was always surrounded by Chicano murals and graffiti. I never really had like pride within some of the things that were within the Chicano culture, but because it wasn't really taught to me going to school. But we'll go to the next one. That's a painting of a rooster. These are just some of the examples of murals that I do in my community. I try to represent my culture and its beauty through art. I studied abroad about 10 years ago in Mexico, and you could go to the next one, or I'll do it here. Sorry about that. Just try to represent the culture and to the highest place that I could academically in my community, and try to mentor youth, because it's really important to show young people how many of our cultures have contributed to society and the country, but we're not taught that when we're going through the academic system. This is a piece here that was done a few years ago in a backyard, but this piece basically embodies the Mayan culture, which is an indigenous culture that also used hieroglyphics, letters, numbers, and characters, and we have modern day graffiti, which is very popular nowadays. Some people call it urban art. It was one of the first movements that included art, and that was created by young people in New York City. This is a photo of Maya Angelou, and this is done in spray paint, and it was done for my mentor, Judy Boutin, whom is a Jewish person. And when I came to Phoenix from Los Angeles, my experience growing up is that I was always intimidated by people that looked white, and I always felt a disconnection from like the American culture or people that looked white. But Judy had a big heart, and she connected me to education, culture, and job opportunities. And that was for International Day of Peace. This piece here is called Jesus Saves, and it represents compassion, forgiveness, and just reaching out to others in love. This piece here is called Who's Illegal Now? It was done during the SB 1070 policies. I was working with young children in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, and I started to realize that they were very scared. They were very afraid to come home and to have their parents deported. And I just wanted to share the importance and the meaning behind the DACA. It's basically a deferred action for childhood arrivals. It's a policy that provides temporary relief from deportation as well as work authorization to approximately 800,000 young students. Now, these are people that were able to apply. Just imagine the number that wasn't able to apply. These are opportunity youth. We're missing a number here. We've worked from 2012 from 6.7 million youth to 5.5 million young people, but we're leaving DACA students and undocumented students out of the numbers. We're missing out. The economic higher wages translate into higher tax revenue for our country. A lot of DACA students create jobs. 72% of the DACA recipients are hired by companies, and it's mentioned in the top 25 Future 500 as well. And it just benefits the entire community, and so it becomes harder to continue the education and to advance in the community because of the uneligibility for loans and scholarships and grants and funding. And so I just wanted to share with y'all, because everybody is a leader and an influencer in your circle, the way that you can help is to support art that represents social justice in your communities, because these are the people that are struggling and living the lifestyle to spread the message. If we don't have funding, we're not going to be able to sustain the movement. In every movement, you have had art that creates change. Number two, you need to influence policymakers and endorse bills such as the DREAM Act that will support and help move our country forward. Number three is you can use your platforms and the businesses and the clients that you work with. Number four, the National Council of Young Leaders spoke with Starbucks a few years ago, and we had a conversation with the CEOs, and we had this idea of uniting Starbucks with ASU, which is the university that I'm currently attending, studying Bachelor's of Arts. And they created this model where they're helping baristas get scholarships. And lastly, join the Opportunity Youth United movement. It's a movement that we've created for allies and young people to mobilize. And I just wanted to share this piece because he mentioned Charlottesville. If we could go to the camera. This piece was done after Charlottesville, and the reason why I did this piece was because I wanted to share with people what's really happening. This style of printmaking was heavily used by Jose Posada, who was a Mexican artist in the early 1900s during the Mexican Revolution. Not only was he spreading artwork in his community about Mexican issues, but he was also talking about the World War I and what was happening in the Holocaust. So this piece here represents a challenger. We have the police, people that represent the KKK or different hate groups with torches. This is a spiral that represents a hurricane, but also confusion. And in his hat, it says, "Make America Great Again." And then here on the left side, there's a solar eclipse. And this piece here has police and riot gear. And August 22nd, there was a rally in Phoenix, Arizona, and the police used violent force against the protesters. And I was there during the whole protest. And a lot of children and elderly and some of my friends were shot with rubber bullets and small grenades and different types of force. So the best thing that you could do is to speak up and do not be silent. Thank you.
So even though our group is a little bit smaller, we know that for these amazing folks, we've got a number of questions. We want to preface this question part that we'd really like to hear from youth leaders and participants first. So do we have some folks? We've got microphones that are moving around the room. Do folks that want to come on up too, because you're going to be in the Q&A. So anyone want to start us off? Leaders? Yeah. Ruth's got her hand up, I think, but...
No,
well, but youth, we want to hear from some youth first. We know we're going to come back to Ruth. Oh, and by the way, we were in her session earlier. Happy birthday. Okay, young people, you got a chance. Don't miss your moment. Uh-oh, some time to process, yes, right? Can you imagine? That's the reality, right? When we're working with a group that's this dynamic, it's tough. I mean, I'll stop standing here. Greg sort of clicks through and is able to sort of just go from one thing to the next, right? This is a lot to absorb. And so we know it's a lot, but all of us want to make sure that we get a chance to have some real live conversation for about the next 15 minutes, because Monique Miles has told many of us on this stage that we will not walk out of here as ably bodied as we are right now if we don't hurry up. So we've got about 15 minutes before we transition into the last wrap-up activities. Etef's going to give us one more spoken word, and we're going to do two actions together to walk us out and wrap things up.
We go to 2:45, right?
Yeah, till 2:45.
Okay, so we got 45 minutes?
No, not for Q&A.
No, I know.
Yes.
No,
This is why I'm moderating, sir.
There you go.
Go for it. Please give us your name and your community.
Tamir Holmes from San Diego, from Pillars of the Community. And this question is centered to Vinny. I wanted to ask, so when the police does something wrong, like how can you hold them accountable? Or like civic engagement, or like how can you get the people to notice that too?
That's a really good question, because I think that right now there are very little ways to hold them accountable. We haven't seen them actually be held accountable in a meaningful way. What we try to do, like I said, get it to where DA is actually prosecuting them and charging them with crimes if they actually hurt somebody, or the Independent Oversight Office is able to influence that in some way with policy as well. I think that one thing that we can do is create alternatives to policing, because I think there are so many issues in our society that we should be able to solve without using people with guns and badges, or the system of cops, courts, and cages that hasn't actually made us any safer, or at least that's what our organization contends. So in Denver, the process is to complain to the OIM, but the reality is that's not going to do much. Or to, once something has happened, file a civil lawsuit. Is anyone here from Denver? Just as I see one, or maybe a couple people.
Barclay.
Well, yeah, Barclay. Denver, very few people know this, and I've actually talked with a lot of people while being here, but Denver is one of the worst cities in the entire country for police brutality by virtue of how much we pay out in civil lawsuit settlements. That's been the solution for our city for so long, and that's taxpayer money that gets paid out, because it's not police money, it's us that pay that. Just in last year, between two cases alone, $9.4 million was paid out because people were killed. My colleague Alex Landau that I mentioned earlier, I again encourage you to look at his story as well. He was paid the fourth highest civil settlement in the history of Colorado. So that's been our solution, and I think that what that means for us is to work towards change by virtue of not using that system anymore. I don't know if that actually answered your question. That was a long way to not. Do you want to follow up at all?
Let me see. Because I asked that question because it happened to me, and I didn't do anything about it because I was scared. Because I wanted to ask another question: are you targeted, like when you do make complaints, or like subpoena the little cam videos or anything?
Yeah, that definitely does put a target on your back.
Yeah, that's why I didn't do it.
Yeah, and that's like the indication that something's not working, because if you do try to achieve some kind of accountability through our system, it doesn't happen, and you actually become a target again. One thing I would also say is that we have a system that encourages not to challenge the charges that we receive. We have 97% of people that receive charges accept a plea bargain. So we don't have a court system, we have a plea system. And that's to say that 97% of people that get charged with a crime accept some level of guilt, despite whether or not they may be guilty or at all, just to avoid heavier charges, like you said, or targeting, or to pay to go to court. Not a lot of people know that you have to pay to go to court, or pay for a jury. So yeah, I think that it does make you a target. And I think that there aren't a lot of solutions out there. But I would look at cities like Utah was doing some good things, but we've now seen some bad things come out of there as well. Seattle was doing some good things. I don't know. I was going to ask you what your encounter was.
Just resist.
Huh?
They just charged me with resist. That's it. Yeah. They dropped it.
So that's one thing that we're doing at the state level here in Colorado, is challenging that notion that you can resist arrest without doing anything else. Like it's not possible to resist arrest when that is your charge of being arrested. So that's a policy decision that we're working on at the state level. But one thing that we're also working on is making it easier to decertify officers, which navigates around the entire system
and makes it easier to actually make it so that they can't be a police officer anywhere or a security officer. And so Denver has one of the hardest process, or Colorado has one of the hardest process to decertify officers. And so we're trying to work on that now, which is actually something, ironically, that police are on board with, because chiefs can't hold their own officers accountable, and sheriffs can't hold their officers accountable because they're afraid that the unions will step in and make it so that they're not able to hold their officers accountable. So that is one thing that we're working on in Colorado, is making it easier to decertify, but also changing that language to say you can't be arrested for resisting arrest. That's absurd.
May I jump in on that, Barclay? Also, the other thing is not to do it alone. Am I mic'd?
Yeah,
Can you all hear me? Okay. The is not to do it alone. You know, I think we talked yesterday about, there are some elders and other folks who have gone through this, but to do it in community, because it's, the title is When We Fight, We Win, and it's you got to do it as part of a we. And I mentioned, go check out the folks up in LA as well, who created they got civilian oversight over the LA Sheriff's Department, and show your video around, get the stories out there to at least and build that strong solidarity community, and then when you want to decide to take that next step, you have a community behind you.
How about some other folks?
Hello again. Brianna Decker from Oakland. Major shout out to my sis Jamisha up there. You're doing a wonderful job. I had a question. You guys are all professionals. You guys all, stick very strong to your cultural identity, and I respect that a lot, because that's what I do as well. Do you have any tips for, one, fighting the battle, as well as sticking strong to cultural identity? I know it can't be easy. It's not easy for me, but it's necessary. Could you guys speak to that, please?
Yes, I'd like to share about that, because I also felt, when I was younger, I felt like an identity crisis, because I didn't know. There were so many labels that were given to me: Hispanic, Latino, Mexican, Mexican-American, Chicano, and then there's derogatory names as well. But what I learned from studying Chicano studies is that when the indigenous people were forced to become slaves in the late 1400s, the Spanish created the first social class system in America. And so throughout that history, the indigenous people wanted to assimilate to the Spanish culture because they were the oppressors. So what I came to realize is that we can acculturate. You can embrace who you are, where you come from, and embrace your roots because it's beautiful. And some of us may not know that those roots are beautiful because we only see the negative sides and TV and schools and in our work or the way people speak about us. But when you dig deep and you go back to the roots, or you go back to your country of origin and you see the beauty, it's who you are. And so I think that you can acculturate by embracing your roots, your language, your traditions, the things that you were taught, but also embrace the American culture and the values that have sustained, like the goodness and the good things out of the country. You could mix them, but don't ever assimilate, acculturate, because we're a big mix of cultures and we need to embrace each other.
Well, you already know, like, hip-hop around the world, right? So, I walk in there just like this, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think wherever you go, you just got to have your own culture, you know what I mean? When I dealt with a lot of transformations as a youth and been vegan since I was 14, I'm 31. A lot of, intergenerational tyranny, should I say. A lot of elders is like, yo, I'm not recycling, I'm not doing this. I'm like, what about the youth and, the plastic straws and all this stuff? And so when I dealt with, embracing sustainability and holistic health and going into the Black and brown community, a lot of times it's like, yo, that's what white people do. We don't do yoga. We don't eat healthy. We don't eat leaves and stuff. Hey, yo, Real though, yeah, college though, yeah, man, like, no doubt. But this is the kind of stuff that I've had to like stay true. So like since 2002, started an organization called Going Green, Living Bling. I was going in their schools and redefining the image of wealth in hip hop. And we just did it. I was like, all right, all the B-boys, do some yoga with us. The break dancers came and did yoga with us. We started working with the youth. They did get with it. You know, trying to talk to youth about growing food, and they weren't really feeling it, especially when it came to their Jordans. They weren't trying to get in the garden. So hydroponics and aquaponics and, you know, vertical gardens, that's what they're interested in, you know? Holistic health, you know what I mean? Juicing, all that, you know what I mean? This is the kind of things that I felt like, you know, depending on where you are, you just kind of just meet where they're at, you know? A lot of times, you know, elders ask me all the time, like, yo, what's that one recipe? How do you make cheese out of cashews? And I'm like, you know, like a lot of things are transforming, but as long as you stay true to your culture, everybody gonna come your direction. Look at sustainability now. Look at all these tracks. I've been doing environmental hip hop for over 10 years, 14 years now. As a matter of fact, we got a proclamation from the mayor not too long ago, but the fact that it took so long, I mean, the hood wasn't doing it. Now I got cats in the hood trying to get solar panel switches, you know? That's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quickly, I think that's something that I grappled with a lot, like a young, you know, black woman coming out of the hood, going into, you know, these professional settings and really feeling like I'm leaving my identity behind and I'm not being true to myself. You know, it was always feeling like I was having to split myself in two. And I've always felt a little bit of guilt about that, because I'm like, how do I represent for my people and really bring my authentic self to meetings, to, you know, spaces that I'm in. But I think, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22, because I think a part of us, we do have to sort of assimilate in ways, right? We do have to leave, you know, behind culture to some degree in order to step into these spaces, right? You know, and I think that's for anybody, but especially for a young person that's stepping into the professional realm, it can be very challenging, right? And then just also feeling like, again, you know, I'm not being authentic to my people, to my truth. And even to today, I think we all, you know, have to do the whole code switching. But I think that that's something I definitely grappled with a lot. And so for me, it was very helpful to have allies who were able to speak to those who, you know, may have questioned, you know, why was it said in that way? Why wasn't I able to, you know, speak to something in a way that made them feel comfortable? I've been lucky enough to always work with other black women who already really knew what's up, but I think that it's important for young people who are getting into the work world to have allies, to be able to just even have conversations about what does that look like, to show up in your community and then have to show up at work. And really oftentimes I felt like I'm not even giving them who I really am, you know, and I felt stuck because I didn't know how else to be. So I just want to uplift that perspective.
Can I ask Barclay what you think about identity politics? And
I was just going to share, Jamisha is like tracking, we're on a meta mind meld right now, like the Vulcan mind meld, because she said keywords, right, that often get turned into an academic setting, code switching. That's very real, right? So many of you all at the sites as adults can be allies for young folks coming up to help question HR policies that folks just take for granted. Right? So as adult allies, that's our work to be doing. We don't just get to go in and do the work. We have to do the work and the other work. We have to go in, and when you're talking about those settings, right, we know that workspaces are often, and there's a lot of coded language about what does it mean to be professional? Is that for how folks dress? And so that can be simple conversations about helping folks say, hey, when all of us had to go through that process of get that first suit or that first outfit, switch that bad boy up with a blazer or a different pants or some shoes, right? Not all of us are rolling like, you know, some folks in this room, we won't name names, but some folks know how to bring it every day, right? Others of us, it's a process. And again, that's a very big intersection between race, class, gender, right? For many women in this room that are young women, talk with women that are a little bit older than you to talk about how coded the workplace used to be as a woman just to have your body policed and what was seen as professional, right? Whether the length of your hem, whether you could wear a pantsuit or not, we know that those things have been politicized around gender. We have to talk about that. For GLBTQ brothers and sisters, how when they're stepping into a workplace, what does it look like when we know that certain colleagues still get they get triggered and try to superimpose that, well, we have to stick to these false binaries of male and female, right? Those are things that as organizations and staffs, we all have to be doing in our internal practice and organization as we support the individual work that we're doing and the broader network collective work around the country. Thanks, Greg. We've got a couple hands here. We want to make sure, before we go into this gentleman, I want to get the young lady in the burgundy sweater because she said she needed a minute. She's had at least 10, so thank you.
Hi, Frida from Seattle with King County Government. My question, I feel like it's kind of my question, but it's a question that's been asked to me in a lot of different spaces too many times. It upsets me, actually. And I wanted to ask you guys, because I feel like everyone can benefit from it. What does it mean? So I've been in like a lot of meetings of like organizations trying to be like equity meetings. It makes me tired, but what does it mean to be an ally? What does it look like to be an ally? Because like, it bothers me when people are like, oh yeah, I'm an ally. Like you can't just say you're an ally. That's not enough. And it doesn't mean that you are one. So can you guys tell us, like, what does it mean to be an ally? What does it look like?
You want to start?
Yo, I just found out about this campaign about how much people suck. Literally, like too many straws, yo, plastic straws everywhere. And over 500 million straws are used every day, right? It goes to the ocean, goes into our landfills. I thought about like, so I'm a chef, right? I'm a vegan and raw food chef. I do a lot of yoga retreats and a lot of different like, personal chef work. And I figured out that like, if I don't keep my ingredients fair trade, let alone organic, then I'm not supporting the farmers, right? So even this deeper than that, I started thinking about just like, just all this carbon being released into the atmosphere and deforestation and how, the way that I purchase actually is the best way to, affect climate change in a positive direction. I started thinking about that with some more young people, like, water conservation is important, supporting what's happening, within Standing Rock, all the way down to Flint, Michigan, all the way down in police brutality. Like, you can show your solidarity, and I think that's what a lot of times people are figuring out what that looks like, for, people who don't have, those issues, or if they're super privileged, then like it's really important for them to do so. You know what I mean? If you have the power to vote with $1, I think is the best way to be an ally, and just consume consciously.
Yeah. Francisco, will you, as you're passing the mic, will you share the story that you did on the panel yesterday about for you as a Latino, Mexicano, Chicano male, talking about Black Lives Matter and being there for Black brothers and sisters as an ally?
Well, I'll just share a quick story. I think that sometimes you may be like a white person and maybe you do want to help like people that are like struggling, or you could be like a brown person, trying to have solidarity with like LGBTQ or Black Lives Matter. And even though like what I was saying the other day is that even though I'm not a young Black man, and I may not ever know how it feels like to be like in ETEP's shoes, like we still have to like stand up for each other. And when you see something that's wrong, I believe that by educating the people around us, it can really create change. I'll give you an example. Growing up in Los Angeles, there was a lot of segregation between the brown and Black communities, and the way that we got treated by white people really impacted my family and the way that they saw other people. I feel like in the beginning, my family would make racist remarks against Asians, against Blacks, all types of people. But when I went to Phoenix and I got mentored, and my stereotypes started breaking, and I realized that it's not about color or culture, it's about people's intentions. It's about people's hearts. And then one of my best friends was Black, his name was Lee. He was a mentor of mine, and we became roommates, and I'd bring him over to my house. He would cook for my family, and then my family would cook for him, and just interacting and inviting people to your homes. That's where it starts, building solidarity, building like relationships. And I think that when we can build relationships, like last night, me and Greg and our buddy here, we were just chopping it up and talking and like having a good time. And we all come from different cultures, different backgrounds, but that's what will unite us is the food.
And I just want to add, allies are great, but I want accomplices. Like, I want people that are willing to challenge their own biases, their own beliefs about the world to better understand other people's experiences. And especially if they genuinely have a concern for that experience, to be willing to put themselves out there and make themselves vulnerable to understand that they don't have that experience, but also understand what that experience is and how to best show up for it. And we want people that ideally would put their bodies on the lines just like we do as well. So I think allies, there's a step to get there, which allies is one, but I want accomplices.
Greg, did you want to say something about that as well?
I wanted to ask you about what you were talking about last night about being in solidarity with men, being in solidarity with women.
That's right. So, Rita, I think one of the things that we talked about, right, is obviously Jamisha was not there last night. She was spending time with other beautiful folks. But we were having a gendered conversation as men, right, and as different aged men. And as how we do this work, there are intersecting identities that we all bring in, right? And how do we, when we're in these public spaces and in our public lives, make sure that we've got integrity in modeling behavior that is to the core, that nobody could question how we show up and what we do, right? And in the work that we do with artists, right, we were joking about it, right? There's a term, groupies, that is a very gendered term, right? And so how do men manage that type of energy, right? Because all energy that is prana, chi, is energy that can be interpreted and often gets, manifested in our society as just sexual energy, right? But we all have to bring the energy to our work, to our relationships, to our loved one, to our friends and family, and to the young people. When we're talking about trauma-informed care, that has to begin with us, right? And so again, we don't want to get stuck on that word. But I think what you would really do is ask those folks when they hear this, and Greg, I was going to throw it back to you about what you were sharing about having people of color ask questions of white people about, this is what I would like from when someone wants to use the term ally, this is how you should really show up. So share that with colleagues, whatever their identity, right? So that everyone is clear. I think the other thing that we need to do is we just need to have these conversations, because in a lot of conversations that I have with colleagues and coworkers, there is, and especially around the work around race, a white colleague will shut down immediately and default that they don't have anything to contribute to a conversation. That's not accurate, right? Because we know that whiteness is not real. It is a construct. There is no country called white, right? They're European Americans, and they have, and part of, I think, the work that we need to do, right? When we talk about DACA, and we were talking about this a little bit last night, Francisco, Greg, and I, before ETEF got there, of previous generations of European immigrants. When we hear those stories now, the individuals that immigrated were heroes and are heroes in their family stories. Why aren't we doing that now with families that have immigrated to this country, right? The other thing that we have to do in family structures is when we talk about, remember the media narrative was that DACA students did nothing wrong. But then what does that imply of who did something wrong, right? Parents did nothing wrong to try to figure out a better life for themselves and their children. And the other challenge that does from when we talk, you hear Vinny talk about the complexity of legal structures, we have to be really clear about what is that doing for younger siblings that may have been born in this country that have citizenship, right? So we can't create those internal boundaries, and so we've got to be modeling and showing up and doing the best we can and not get stuck in the word. So keep modeling that. Greg, one last thing, do you want to share in that in order for Rita, the piece that you were talking about just doing those interviews and thinking about that exact issue?
Yeah, I mean, the one word that when we fight, we win is repeated twice is the we. And so I've been wanting to do a set of interviews, maybe do a podcast or something with people of color about who makes a good ally, what makes a good accomplice, so how to be really good at stand up in solidarity. And as I wrote the book, I got challenged a lot on it, and we created a Google Doc where everybody got to edit their own stories, and everybody who was interviewed in the book, and actually some of the discussions in the comments section became part of the book. We had a gathering of the folks who were in the book to help shape how it was going to go. This panel was, was a form of solidarity. I was asked to be the plenary speaker, and I said, let's bring the the folks on the front lines out there who have been interviewed in the book. And, and then lastly, the way I stand in solidarity is all the royalties for the book go back into the projects and the artist projects that are related to the book. So, and then last thing I'll say is that I have this T-shirt I was telling them last night that says, rules for dating my daughter. And I have two daughters. One's 15, one's 22. I've had it a few years. And it says, rule number 1, I don't make the rules. Rule number 2, you don't make the rules. Rule number 3, she makes the rules. Rule number 4, her body, her rules. And so I think there's a lot of ways to stand in solidarity, be an accomplice. But the last thing I'll say gets back to what you're saying, is I think it happens with mutual love. You know, like I'm connected, my co-author's in Puerto Rico, and they're suffering, and so I'm going to do everything I can to help alleviate that. So I think the more we can create those, and there's such an apartheid in our society that solidarity is harder and harder. So, and you got to be patient with some of the people who don't know intrinsically, you know, white supremacy or their privilege.
Our last question, sir.
Thank you all. To the panel, you guys open eyes. Continue to speak, continue to be the voice. I do have one question though, and the question is this. I'm hearing a lot on the fringe of what I define as the difference between racism and classism. How much of what your personal stories do you think falls into the racism and classism difference?
I mean, I guess I could just start because our organization, while we focus on racial justice and very much of what we do is rooted or what we are addressing is rooted in white supremacy, we also recognize that in our city, there's a lot of classism by virtue of how we criminalize homeless folks. Michael Marshall and Marvin Booker are both Denver residents or homeless Denver individuals who were killed by police. So they have the intersections of both race and class where they were treated in our city. Greg and I both are connected to Michael Marshall and actually connected to each other on his death. And I mean, he was killed because our society really doesn't know how to deal with homelessness, or at least the way we do deal with it is by jailing it. So I think that's where we as an organization focus on the intersections of class and race, is that, you know, we have a system that's rooted in white supremacy, but we also have an abundance of classism that places the other to people that either don't have homes or can't afford homes or are being pushed out of their homes right now. And so I guess that's all I had to add for that.
I mean, I would just add that, you know, working with young women, young girls who are being sexually exploited, I think oftentimes when the work started, folks were looking at it as just this one central issue. But at Misty, we were really able to see that, you know, it is an impact outcome of classism and racism, and how do we really address those things without just looking at this young person and what did you do, but what happened to you, and what are those systems of oppression that have impacted you that made you become this vulnerable. So I think, yeah, and just by having conversations about it is how we kind of addressed it as well.
Can I jump in there? I think it's important also to go downstream or upstream, I guess, in terms of classism and talk about markets and talk about capitalism, because classism is the result of a structural system, and just like racism is a result of white supremacy. And so, and the fact that slavery was created, right? So, or whiteness was created so that you could enslave an other. So it was a market system, capitalism, that creates whiteness, and then whiteness, you know, allows you to have slavery. So, you know, and that's why I also think it's important, you know, to patriarchy, you know, as you're talking about there, you know, fits in so much into it, and you know, so the market now drives these girls to do things that. Anyway, so I think there's the intersection of all the issues, and that, you know, so you have poor women of color have the intersection of all three, right?
I just wanted to share that the way that I try to overcome racism and classism through my field, I do different types of work in the community with nonprofit, advising policy, but one of my passions is art. And so it's really interesting because in the art world, traditionally in America, I feel like it's a glass ceiling. If your artwork doesn't match the owners of the gallery's vision, your art's not going to be in there. If your art can't be in a gallery or have an art show or an exhibition, you're not going to sell art. But because of the times that we live in now, because technology is being available to everyone, I think that you can also fight it with social entrepreneurship. And so I really like when artists and other people are finding innovative ways of becoming entrepreneurs and breaking some of those chains that would dictate what we could do and what we can't do with our work, and finding other means and other pathways and resources to be able to create the work that is important. So I think having that that support is very important, and that's how you can do it.
Wow. So back in 2015, I did a TED Talk at TEDx Manhattan. The talk was called Marketing Environmental Hip Hop and Culinary Wellness. I was speaking on the connection between redlining and why food justice is so important, because of the fact that, it definitely is a class issue. A lot of times people in the communities that I grew up in, I had corner stores. The freshest thing I can get is a lemon in a liquor store, right? And because you couldn't find carrots, you can probably find like some old apples in like in a corner store. And the vibe with that, it actually helped me understand that they're using hip hop to sell sugar. And so I started writing music around environmental, awareness, because of the fact that I realized, okay, I see this happening right now. There's more people addicted to sugar than they're addicted to crack. There's more people in my community dying from heart disease and diabetes and hypertension than it is from the KKK, and what that looks like, and why there's so much pharmaceuticals being pumped in my hood. And I thought about, if I can create holistic health practitioners, maybe I can transform the ideas of what classism looks like, because we had to redefine the image of wealth in our own communities. And hip hop stands for higher inner peace, helping other people, also known as the intelligent movement, to be hip and to hop. Also known as health inside people, health outside people. Rapping is something you do, and H-Rap Brown did it best. But we have to think about so many other activists and artists who really don't get time to actually have the platform like a TED, or, I got invited to the White House after that. And I'm rocking, food justice music on the lawn for Obama and them. And I'm thinking about different styles of like how it didn't get that way when I was in the hood doing it in the community. And sometimes like they didn't really understand the connection between holistic health. But the fact that, it's getting to a national level, it doesn't really start with just the class. You have to start with your own personal compassion. And when people learn that compassion on the internal level, I think it will really transform, having compassion for each other, for the planet. You can't say that you're down for trees. You're not, people love dogs more than they love people nowadays. And I see that every day in the hood where I'm from. So, until I see, things happen in our community, we're still going to use arts and activism as a way to address social classism and, this marginalized non-presence of holistic health practitioners of color. So, this is a movement, and it's not going to stop.
Great.
So timing-wise, we're right where we're supposed to be. We're going to wrap up with three things. Speaking of hip-hop, DJ Kavum, Etef is going to close us out with a spoken word, and then we're going to do two quick activities after he speaks so that we can all go out energized to do this work for another year.
Great. Thank you. This poem is dedicated to the people in Swansea area, Globeville, East Side, downtown Denver. They actually are going to extend the highway north instead of south, and there's a Purina dog chow factory there, and it's causing a lot of asthma, a lot of health disparities in the community. And instead of shutting down the factory, they're going to plow about a gang of homes and displace a lot of families. And so this poem is for I-70. Chemtrails cause fires in the West, sprayed all over the hood. Never thought that shit could be good. Now the sheriff said we gotta move. They want to build a highway, and there ain't nothing we can do. I tell them it's like a jungle sometimes. I see them killing the trees, corrupt land with the foreign disease, displacing animals. It makes it harder to breathe, make you fall to your knees, reminisce of the bees. Before you sit down, pray in all four directions. Use your food stamps in the produce section. Get some land, harvest water, keep it moving. It's eye for an eye, saying you got the show improving. See me manifest the heat, holding the heat in the night. Hopefully, hold tight, eat fresh and eat rice and watch what you do. Watch what you do. See, watch what you say now. Watch what you do.
So we wanted to do two things. Again, themes come up throughout this time. On this stage, we've talked about amazing successes the last few days, and congratulations to the network and all the gains. We want to take a moment and just do a moment of silence to acknowledge the sadness that this work also brings. And Jamisha talked about self-care. We have to take care of ourselves in order for this work and this network to go anywhere. And so let's just take a moment. And when we know from a few years ago, right, when Eric Garner got murdered, he said, I can't breathe. Our job, every one of us in this work, we have to breathe. Let's take a few minutes to just acknowledge that sadness, take a few breaths. Thank you all. Last thing we want to do to close out is a taiko drum circle energizer. How many folks know taiko drums? No? A few, like 2 or 3 hands went up. So we all want to stand up. So taiko drummers, right, are the big drums. We're going to do 3 slaps on our thighs, and you do this 3 times. And then after those 3 slaps, you raise your hands in the air, pulling from hip-hop culture. We yell, ho, not in it's a garden implement, right? Etef? Garden implement, ho. Yes, not the others. So, but that's taiko. We're mixing cultures. This is as Francisco talked about, we're cultural mashup right now, right? Multicultural mashup. So 3 slaps, thighs, arms in the air, ho, 3 times. Ready? Ho, ho, ho. Thank you all. Blessings.
Thing. Are you going to say something, Steve?
No, I was just, you
Okay.
finish. You say it. Come
All
on
right.
over. Come on over.
Hey, sorry, can I forgot I was supposed to do a public service announcement for my co-authors. So if you like the book, Agitarte, When We Fight, We Win, my co-authors are all in Puerto Rico, and they're just raising money for food and water filters and generators. And so if you want to help out the folks in Puerto Rico, go to the Agitarte website or their Facebook page, and you can help them out. So every little bit will help right now. Thanks.
A couple more quick announcements.
I also wanted to mention, if anybody's interested in a print or would like to talk more about the artwork, I'll be in the corner section in the back.
Yes. Hey, safe travels, everybody. This adjourns the meeting. We will see you in South King County in May. Cheers. Thanks, everybody.